This Sunday is what has been, it is actually the 40th anniversary of what is known as Sanctity of Life Sunday. And this is a special designation given to the third Sunday in January, and it first was pronounced in January of 1984, and it was at the behest of President Ronald Reagan. And he said this about this particular event. He said, "I call upon the citizens of this blessed land to gather on that day in homes and places of worship to give thanks for the gift of life and to reaffirm our commitment to the dignity of every human being and the sanctity of each human life." Now, President Reagan then advocated for prayer and for using whatever legal means were available to end the perversion and atrocity of abortion. I would be surprised if he thought that he could ever live to see the day that we see, which is the overturning of the Roe versus Wade decision that was made in 1973, and which prompted him to actually respond in this way. Though we have lived to see that particular court case be overturned, the battle is not going in our favor for those of us who believe in life. Let me share with you some statistics that come from the Centers for Disease Control and also from the Guttmacher Institute. How many of you have heard of the Guttmacher Institute before? The Guttmacher Institute is touted as the independent research arm of Planned Parenthood Federation of America. What that basically means is that those who promote abortion are telling you exactly how successful they are in their promotion, exactly how successful they are in murdering the children that they don't find to be valuable. So these statistics came from 2020, and since 1973 up to 2020, there were over 63 million abortions performed in the United States of America. According to the Centers of Disease Control, there were 204 abortions for every 1,000 live births. This means that, according to the Guttmacher Institute, 20.6% of pregnancies in 2020 ended in abortion. 20.6%. And they say that that number was up from 18.4% of pregnancies in 2017. So in the span of 3 years, there's a nearly 2% increase, or just over 2% increase in the number of pregnancies that end in abortions. And this is all well and good because pill abortions account for 53% of all abortions in the United States. So you don't actually have to see the physical consequence of what you've done. You take a pill, and the pill causes your body to react, and you flush the life out of your body. Now, despite the fact that these institutions, like the Center for Disease Control and the Guttmacher Institute, share their data with the world, and we also can look at the undeniable reality that the number of abortions are increasing, we cannot escape the fact that our cultural attitude seems to be one of embracing this practice rather than rejecting it. This declaration that our culture appears to embrace abortion more than reject it is supported, I believe, by the anecdotal evidence of what has happened since Roe versus Wade was overturned in 2022. Since 2022, 6 states in our union, 4 of which would be considered politically red or conservative, have either passed laws through citizen voting or have had the state legislature pass laws that would enshrine the right of abortion into the state constitution or the state's bylaws. The point of this is that when the decision to grant access or place restriction upon abortion access is given to the states, the people in the states are overwhelmingly choosing to keep or grant or extend access to abortion. That says more about you and me and the people that live in our state than it does about any federal institution. Why might this be? Why might this be? Well, I can say this, it's not a data problem because it's not hard to find the data on the number of abortions. It's not hard to find the data on what is actually present inside the womb of a pregnant woman. We don't have a data issue. In fact, we are the most over-dataed people probably in the history of the world. So it's not an issue of we just need to tell people the facts. That's not the issue. The issue is a values problem. It is a values problem. There are two drastically different value systems that view what human life is and how to respect human life. And these value systems have been broken into two categories because in our culture, everything has to be broken into some type of category so that we can measure it and quantify it and talk about it and say, well, these people believe this and therefore they acted this way or they voted this way or whatever. So we cannot escape using the terminology that our culture uses. So what are the two value systems that describe two different perspectives on life? Or I should say this, what are the two names that describe the value systems on these two different perspectives? Well, of course, you have the pro-choice perspective and the pro-life perspective. These labels, of course, are applied to the issue of abortion. But if we really dive deeper into what the adherents of each position believe, we would see that they apply their value system beyond just the life in the womb. They apply their value system to every aspect of life. And so those who would label themselves pro-choice really believe that you should be in charge of your life and death and perhaps the lives and deaths of others from the time that they grant you life to the time that they grant you to lose your life. And those who are pro-life, I think, have some challenges to face as well, which we will talk about. But what I want to do is I want to explain to you where does the value system actually come from? Because we recognize that there is a pro-choice value system, a pro-life value system, and again, we like to talk in these broad, sweeping terms. But where does the value system actually come from? Well, if we define what a value system is, I found an interesting definition from a behavioral scientist. So the reason I did this is that I want to show from the data of secular people what they actually think and how they actually believe. So, from this gentleman named Jason Herrera, a behavioral scientist, he defines value system this way. He says a value system is a set of consistent, enduring beliefs and principles that guide an individual's or a group of individuals' behavior, decisions, and judgments. The values that one holds are often derived from cultural, social, religious, and personal sources, and they shape an individual's perception of what is right and wrong, good and bad, and what is considered important in life. I thought that was a really good definition. We can agree to that definition even as believers. You know, our pastors have described this value system using another word. That word is worldview. You've probably heard some or all of us talk about worldview. And worldview is a synonym. It is another word that describes the value system that a person has. So whether you call it your value system or whether you call it your worldview, the key point is this: every person has one. Every individual who is alive today has a worldview or a value system. And the value system that you hold has a great influence on how you actually live in relationship to other people. Your value system has a great influence on how you actually live in relationship to other people. Now, it's interesting, in the definition that the behavioral scientist gave, he talked about your values are derived from cultural, social, religious, and personal sources. He's pointing to a whole bunch of horizontal institutions. These are institutions that all men have and have made. But the fact of the matter is that value systems are actually shaped by forces that are beyond mere men. And this is the important point to understand. Every person's value system is shaped by a force that is beyond humanity, greater than or distinct from humanity. There is a spiritual component for every value system. And let's just take the Christian first, okay? For the Christian, what is the spiritual force that shapes our value system? Yahweh, the Creator God, the one and only God, who has revealed himself and his truth to us in these 66 books. Okay? That is beyond or outside of humanity, outside of mankind. And if you're a Christian, you should be holding fast to this word of truth because it is what shapes the way that you think and interact with others in the world. But where is the spiritual component formed, or where does it originate for those who are non-Christians? Have you thought about that? Well, there's two sources. The first source would be the inherent nature of sin that we receive at our conception and that we have throughout our lives until the moment of salvation, when the old man is done away with and we receive a new heart and the dwelling or the indwelling presence of the Holy Spirit. So that is one of the spiritual components. It is the sin nature. But the other spiritual component is actually an individual. And it is an individual who has sworn himself to be the chief enemy of God. And his name is Satan, or the devil, or the serpent from old. Unbelievers, and even some believers, like to think of Satan as just this mystical force who exists way out there. He doesn't really have much to do with my life. But the fact of the matter is that Satan is a powerful spiritual force that helps to shape the thinking of all non-believers on this earth. And he helped to shape your thinking prior to your conversion. When we look at the value system that unbelievers have, we cannot overlook the role that Satan plays in establishing and empowering the way that unbelievers think. Now, it boggles my mind that some believers have practically denied the existence of Satan because they just think, well, that was back then, but we're living now. I've met believers who are like that. But let's stop and think for a moment about how Jesus evaluated Satan's influence in society. Stop and think for a moment. If you want to, you can turn to John chapter 8. John chapter 8. And Jesus is having a discussion in John chapter 8 with the Pharisees. These are the religious leaders of his day. His disciples are also present with him. And there are also some believers who are there. So in John chapter 8, if you start at verse 31, okay, Jesus says this. So Jesus was saying to those Jews who had believed him, "If you abide in my word, then you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." Verse 33, they answered him, "We are Abraham's seed and have never yet been enslaved to anyone. How is it that you say you will become free. Here Jesus reveals the first point that I just made to you about how your value system is established. Verse 34, truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who commits sin is the slave of sin. And the slave of sin does not remain in the house forever, but the Son does remain forever. So if the Son makes you free, then you will be free indeed. I know that you are Abraham's seed, yet you are seeking to kill me, because my word has no place in you. I speak the things which I have seen with my Father, therefore you also do the things which you have heard from your father. So Jesus reveals to them that the first master that they serve is their own sin nature. And the second master is a father, but not God the Father, not Yahweh. These Jews answered and said, they said to him, Abraham is our father. Jesus said, no, if you were Abraham's children, you would do the deeds of Abraham. But now you are seeking to kill me, a man who has told you the truth, which I heard from God. This Abraham did not do. You are doing the deeds of your father. They said to him, we were not born of sexual immorality, insulting Jesus' virgin conception and birth. We were not born of sexual immorality. We have one Father, God. Jesus said, if God were your father, you would love me. But verse 44 says what? You are of your father, the devil, and you want to do the desires of your father. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. Whenever he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own nature, for he is a liar and the father of lies. Look at what Jesus reveals. And this goes not just for those Jews who were confronting him at that moment, but for every unbeliever who is living on the face of the earth. You are enslaved, first of all, to sin. So you can't even practice or understand or do the righteousness that God would desire. Secondly, you are a child of your father, the devil. And your father is a murderer from the beginning and a liar from the beginning. And so why would we expect people who don't believe in Jesus Christ to have the same perspective on life as we do? We should not be surprised that they share a different value system because their value system is derived from their father, who is a murderer and a liar. Think about it. Think about it. Satan's influence was powerful. Satan had convinced these people that they were actually serving Yahweh when in fact they weren't serving Yahweh. That's how powerful Satan's influence is. And so today we have people who are thinking they are serving the greater good of humanity, the greater good of the individual, by affirming that a pro-choice position, a pro-choice value system is better for the greater good of society. They think they're doing good, but in fact, Satan has deceived them to actually accomplish his will, which is to be a murderer. Now, if you don't want to believe what Jesus says about Satan, maybe you'll believe what Paul says. Paul says this in 2 Corinthians 4:4, in whose case the God of this age has blinded the minds of the unbelieving so that they may not see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. Both Paul and Jesus believed that Satan has an immense role in not only deceiving people, but influencing them to call things true which are actually false. That is what Satan is spending his time doing right now. And so now we are dealing with a realm that is the right realm. What do I mean by that? We're no longer dealing with the political realm. We're no longer dealing with human institutions. We are now dealing in the spiritual realm, and this is the realm where we have victory. This is the realm where we have the authority. This is the realm where if we can get the battle to this point, we have an opportunity to win because it is the truth of God that will actually set people free. You can show people data points all you want. You can show images, 3D images of babies in the mother's womb. You can show movies like the movie Unplanned that was in theaters a number of years ago. You can show them that, but you're losing because you haven't actually affected their value system. You haven't actually attacked the fortress. It's a spiritual fortress. We need to understand that it is a spiritual battle. I like how in one of the lectures I was watching this week in my research, Seth Gruber, I don't know if you know him or not. I wasn't really familiar with him until this week. Seth Gruber said this. He said, the current culture war that is being pro-life or pro-choice is actually a proxy war for the greater spiritual warfare that is going on in the hearts and minds of people. That's what I believe too. We have these labels, pro-choice, pro-life. That makes us think of them as political issues, but they're not. They're actually spiritual issues. And he also pointed this out. He also said that Satan has been effective at deceiving pastors into not speaking out about pro-life against pro-choice because it's political in nature and pastors shouldn't be political. I would say that's largely true. All right, so I know that's not been true at our church, but it is largely true. Pastors don't want to get into the spiritual warfare aspect of this issue, but we are going to do that this morning. We're going to take a look now at the characteristics of the pro-choice value system. And as I do this, I want you to understand that when we talk about the pro-choice value system, we are talking about a false religion. These are spiritual matters to them. It is their creed. Just as much as you would believe the Nicene Creed or the Apostles' Creed, they have a creed that they believe, and they act according to their creed. So I want to reveal some of that. I don't have time to do all of it this morning, but I want to reveal some of that to you this morning. When we look at the characteristics of the pro-choice value system, we see that their highest principle of moral truth is that the individual's freedom and personal autonomy to rule oneself is the greatest good. Let me say that again. The highest principle of morality, the greatest and most cornerstone principle that they have is that the individual's freedom and the individual's personal autonomy to make their own decisions acts as the greatest good. It is the greatest good. In other words, you only need to look to yourself and what is good for you and what is best for you to determine what is moral for you. Man, that just sounds really good, doesn't it? What is best for me at this moment? Whatever is best for me at this moment must be good for me and therefore is moral for me. And we could talk for a long time about how that has implications for sexual purity, for drug use and drunkenness, for all kinds of ills that we find in society. But we're going to confine our discussion to really the issue of life, okay? And how their desire to have freedom and personal autonomy makes them make certain choices in relationship to life. The pro-choice value system is really a Romans 1:18 and following perspective on life. All right, how do you get to this point? All right, well, Romans 1:18. If you are still in your scriptures, you can turn to Romans. We'll kind of run through this in a quick fashion because I want you to understand how they got to this particular principle of morality being the highest principle for them. Here is the pathway that you follow. First of all, if you are going to have this as your main principle of morality, the first thing you must do is suppress the truth about God and his word. And that's what Romans 1:18 says. The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth and unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. How do you get to this value? You suppress the truth about God and his revealed word. The next thing that you have to do to get to this particular value system is you exchange the worship of the Creator God for the worship of the creation. And this takes place in verses 20, 22, and 23, right? Professing to be wise, they became fools, and they exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the likeness of corruptible man and of birds and of four-footed animals and crawling creatures. You know what they did? They exchanged the worship of the Creator God for the worship of self. Next, what do? They exchange the natural function of your bodies for unnatural function of your bodies. So we're talking about all kinds of sexual perversions. Not just homosexual perversions, but the perversion of the institution that God calls marriage, whereby two individuals who have never been sexually active before are to come together in purity and to create a one-flesh union that should not be broken. That's what God established from the very beginning. But what's the first step in perverting sexuality? It is saying that you can have sexual relationships with whomever you want to with no consequence. That's the first step down. And we move from that to the affirmation of homosexual relationships. And that's what Paul talks about here in verses 24 through 27. Then after we've got to that point, verse 28 says this, verse 28. Just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them over to an unfit mind to do those things which are not proper. And then he lists a whole bunch of sins. And he says, in conclusion, in verse 32, he says, although they know the righteous requirement of God, that those who practice such things are worthy of death, they not only do the same, but they give hearty approval to those who practice them as well. This is how the value system of the pro-choice movement is established. They suppress the truth about God. They exchange the worship of the Creator for worship of self. They exchange the natural function of the bodies for the unnatural. They have an unfit mind, and they give hearty approval to those who also practice rebellious sins. And isn't that what we witness with our own eyes when we look at those who are pro-choice advocates? They are out there saying, shout your abortion. They're out there encouraging other people to commit atrocities against themselves and the life that is within them. And they're saying, what you're doing is moral and good. And so the natural consequence of this value system as it pertains to the value of life, human life, is this. Here are the conclusions that they draw. Life is valuable, but only if you can live unsupported. Clearly, the baby in the womb needs its mother to support it, so it's not as valuable as life that can live unsupported. Next, life is valuable as long as you have the freedom to do what you want. Well, how does that look? Well, if you happen to get pregnant and have a baby, that impedes your personal freedom in your life. And so your life is now less valuable because your freedom has been impinged or impeded by this other life that you're taking care of. And so your value in life is worth your freedom. Is it only as good as your freedom? So therefore, whatever you can do to maintain your freedom, do that. Next, they say this: Life is valuable only if you can experience it. Can you actually enjoy good things in life? Are you conscious? Are you able to express yourself? Or is your living filled with misery? Are you living in a state of, you don't know what's going on? Perhaps you're comatose or some other thing. Finally, they say this: life is valuable only if you can contribute to it. Notice how all of these tenets of the pro-choice value system only consider the individual and what I want. It is an extraordinarily selfish perspective on how we find or determine value in human life. So life is valuable only if you can contribute to it. And there is a point of diminishing returns where, you know what? I'm sorry, but you're just not able to contribute to society as well as you used to be, and so I'm not sure if you're worthy of keeping around. I'm going to make these decisions. It is on account of these positions. This is how they flesh out, this is how they build the house of their personal autonomy and freedom. Because they have built this house, and these are the positions that they take, here's what their value system affirms. Their value system says it is morally acceptable to end the life of a baby in the womb because that life can't survive on its own, so it's not necessarily life yet. Furthermore, that life might impede your freedom, and you don't want that to happen. So if you still want your freedom, you are free to get rid of that other life. Secondly, the pro-choice value system affirms that doctor-assisted suicide, which I found out was conveniently renamed medical assistance in dying, is morally acceptable because it allows the individual to make a free decision regarding your future. Hey, I'm really depressed because of an injury that I had. I have no quality of life. I don't think my life is good. I don't want to live anymore. Therefore, please help me die. Help me die. Thirdly, we see that the pro-choice value system affirms that euthanasia, which is an age-related medical assistance in dying, it's age and value-related medical assistance in dying. You're too old to contribute well to society. Therefore, your burden is greater than your benefit, and so we're going to help you die. Euthanasia is morally acceptable because it frees up resources for healthy, strong, younger, fit members of society who can contribute more than you. These are the actual worldview, or these are the actual results of the worldview of the pro-choice movement. So we're not dealing just with life in the womb. People who are pro-choice want to have the opportunity to kill on command. They want to be able to put to death for a number of different reasons. And so that's why the pro-choice movement is really a culture of death. And our responsibility is to refute and rebuke the culture of death. It may seem shocking to us that these are the actual positions. But these are realities that are being enshrined into law in places, some in the United States, but some not too far from the United States. In 2016, the Canadian Parliament passed a federal legislation that allows eligible adults to request and receive medical assistance in dying. And since 2016, they have only expanded the eligibility for that program. Currently, they are trying to allow individuals who suffer from some kind of diagnosed mental illness to request eligibility for medical assistance in dying. In addition to passing this legislation in June of 2016, The Canadian Parliament also has created a standard practice for euthanasia as a subset of the legislation that either has been enacted or will soon be enacted for different members of Canadian society. I think it's shocking. We think, well, this can't happen here, but it is happening here. Like, it is literally happening here. And it doesn't matter what kind of data points we show the other side. Data doesn't matter when they compare it to their value system. Right? Data doesn't matter when you compare it to the value system. So we need to be smarter about arguing value systems. We need to understand that it is a spiritual battle, and we need to argue at the spiritual level. Now, is it bad to have data? No. Not bad to have data. But we need to understand how to use data effectively to get beyond the issues of data and to get to the issues of spiritual degradation. We need to expose their spiritual darkness. Now, here's what the pro-choice movement is doing. They are codifying their ideas into law. Codifying their ideas into law, which means that they are taking their religious worldview and they are turning it into the law of the land. Now, how many of you have ever been confronted with somebody who says, well, you can't legislate your religion? How many of you ever heard that before? I think a number of us have. Well, guess what? They are legislating their religion, and so we need to be smarter about this and say, no, look, you say I can't legislate my religion. Every single law that is made has some kind of moral component. That's why it's a law. And your laws are derived from your father, the devil, who is a murderer and a liar. And you want to make those laws the laws of the land. Well, let me tell you what, I want to make the laws of the land representative and reflective of God the Father, the creator of all that you see, and the one who loved you enough, despite your rebellion to him, to send his one and only Son to this earth so that he might live a sinless life and be crucified on a cross, shedding his blood as a payment for your sin, you who reject him, so that you might not die but have eternal life. No, I would rather enshrine that individual's laws into the legal fabric of our society than to enshrine the laws of your father, the devil. We need to understand, and we need to be bold enough to say that their worldview is a religious worldview, and our worldview is a religious worldview. And somebody's worldview is going to be enshrined into law. And whose do you want that to be? Now, I think that we understand the characteristics of the pro-choice value system, where it comes from, how it works, what people want to do with it, and we understand that it is a religious system. But I want to turn the spotlight onto those who would be pro-life or would identify as pro-life for just a moment. I want us as Christians to think through something. I want us to think through whether we should accept or reject a partial pro-life position. What do I mean by that? Should we accept or reject a partial pro-life position? Well, what do I mean? There are a lot of people who are pro-life or would profess to be pro-life, but are not actually Christians and don't actually hold a Christian worldview, a biblical worldview. And the pro-life movement as a political entity, cultural phenomenon, can't decide whether it wants to be a religious movement or a secular movement. It claims that all human life is valuable, but the movement doesn't actually have a overarching source text that they point to make that value claim. I take that back. Actually, they do. They do have a source text. Here's what their source text is. It's the Declaration of Independence. You guys are probably familiar. What does the Declaration of Independence say? That all persons should be able to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so the secular pro-life movement, the non-Christian pro-life movement, points to the Declaration of Independence. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There it is. We want to protect life. Well, the Declaration of Independence is actually a secondary source text. Where did those ideas come from in the Declaration of Independence? Well, they came from the Scriptures. They came from the Scriptures. And I'm not trying to say that all of our founding fathers were Christians or that they somehow tried to make America a Christian nation. I think there is some healthy debate about that particular issue. What I want to point out to you is that the pro-life movement points to the secondary source text. Why? Because there are a number of people in the pro-life movement who are somewhere down the Romans 1 road. There are a number of people who are pro-lifers who have suppressed the truth about God. There are a number of people who claim to be pro-life who would embrace sexual perversion from God's original design. There are a number of people who are pro-lifers who would not see a problem with some of the sins that Paul listed there in verses 28 to 32. So they're pro-life, but they're only partially pro-life. And they don't want to use the Scriptures as their real source text because it would convict them of their own sinfulness. So we as Christians, we need to recognize that there are a lot of people who are pro-life, but who are actually not Christians. And so, what's the effect of this? The effect of this is that a lot of pro-life people are actually pro-choice to a certain degree. I found an essay this week in my research, and he was making these points, okay? I'm just going to summarize them for you. He said, when pro-lifers make an exception for abortion in the cases of rape and incest, or when, quote-unquote, the mother's life is at risk, they are siding, actually, with a pro-choice worldview. Because they're saying death is okay in these situations, but maybe not in these other situations. Do you know the Guttmacher Institute says that only 1% of women obtain an abortion because they became pregnant through rape, and less than 0.5% of women because of incest? I mean, if we're looking at exceptions, those are extraordinarily rare. But that's not where the partial pro-life movement ends up. They would affirm that. But then they go beyond that. There are many who claim to be pro-life, but they say, well, we can actually make an exception for abortion up to a certain number of weeks. Recently, you all are probably aware that there's a presidential campaign going on. 2024 is going to be quite the year. Multiple pro-choice candidates have said in the last 2 months that we should try to just implement a national 15-week abortion ban. I mean, that's not a pro-life position. 15 weeks is well into the second trimester. But that's the reasonable pro-life position nowadays. So there are a lot of people who are pro-life, but only partially pro-life. And this is why the pro-life movement loses. Let me just say that. This is why we lose. Because we don't have an absolute position on the value of life. We don't have an absolute source text that we are looking at to define life and when life begins and what we should do with life. The pro-life position will continue to lose because there are many people who would rather have political power than actually stand for life. And so they'll say whatever they need to say in order to get elected. And if we are like, well, that's the only choice, we have to vote for them too, are we contributing to the problem, or are we fighting against the problem? I'm not asking you how to vote, but I want you to think about it. I want you to think about it. We live in a representative democracy where we should be holding the people who represent us accountable to our views. You know that the pro-choice movement is absolutely in the ear of their representatives. Are we in the ear of our representatives? We have a hard time. That's true. Despite our recent win in the Roe versus Wade court case, the pro-life movement has actually lost ground when it comes to protecting life. We've lost ground. We lost ground in our own state last November. It's devastating. Why? Because we don't have a consistent value system, even as a pro-life movement. And now here's what we should do about this as Christians, all right? We need to hold to positions and values that are derived from Scripture. And we need to ask and rebuke those who would be pro-life or partially pro-life, those who would be pro-choice. We need to rebuke them and their positions by stating the following. First, all human life is inherently valuable because human beings, and only human beings, are made in the image and likeness of God. You can go on YouTube and find all kinds of analogies comparing babies in the womb to worms or to other animals or things. That's not a moral equivalence. Human beings are valuable precisely because they are the only creature that God made in his own image. So human beings are infinitely more valuable than any animal, plant, or any other created creature that God made. Genesis 1:26 and 28 communicates this to us. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image according to our likeness." Simple. We also have to affirm that human life begins at the moment of conception. David writes this in Psalm 51:5, "In sin my mother conceived me," not referring to the fact that his mother was sinful in how she conceived him, but in the fact that from the moment that he was conceived, he was, number one, a person, and number two, a sinner. And he needed the forgiveness that only God could offer through faith. Okay? Jeremiah 1:5 says this, that Jeremiah was a person whom God knew prior to his conception. When you look at these verses, personal pronouns are used. Me, you, I. Those don't describe random things, random objects. Those describe people. And so human life begins at the moment of conception. And because human life begins at the moment of conception, human life should be protected by human governments. In Genesis 9:6, God established the first command for the image of God to be protected from murderers. He says, "If a man sheds man's blood, then by man shall his blood be shed. For man was made in the image of God." To desecrate the image of God, whether it's only 5 cells or a fully formed person, is worthy of the death penalty because you have desecrated the image of God. Like, if you walked into a pro-life meeting and you said that, those people would probably look at you like you're a little radical. Now, you might be too radically pro-choice or pro-life for us. I'm not sure that we can handle your brand of pro-life. Well, it's not my brand of pro-life, it's what God said. So we should try to protect life at all costs. Human life is valuable even if it is conceived by sinful means. So let's go back to those exceptions: rape, incest. Do we have examples of people in the scriptures being used mightily of God who were conceived in rape or conceived in incest? Sure. Judah slept with his daughter-in-law. But the resulting offspring was not killed by God. No, but actually became part of the birth lineage of Jesus Christ. I think that's true. You might have to correct me on that one later. There was an incestuous relationship that happened between Lot and his daughter and his daughters. Did God kill the babies who were conceived in them? No, he didn't. Now, they did become the Moabites, which was a people who were wicked. But oftentimes, there are natural consequences to sin that we have to experience because we live in a world that is under the curse of sin. But the answer to solving, hey, one person sinned, is not to say, let's sin again. We all know that's true. We all know that's true. Well, what can you do? I want to leave you with this. What can you do? I want you to three things. Hold your ground or attempt to gain ground when it pertains to enacting laws that protect life. You can be in the ear of your representative and say, look, I want you to enact the strictest pro-life measures that you can possibly enact. We're not compromising at 15 weeks or 12 weeks or even 6 weeks. Let's get some laws on the books that have teeth and also have consequences. So if we're really going to be serious about being pro-life, let's try to gain ground when it comes to enacting laws that protect life. A subset of this is holding your representatives accountable to real pro-life positions. You should know who your representative is in your voting district, and you should just reach out to them. Hey, what's your position on these pro-life issues? Do you really believe in exceptions? Do you not believe in exceptions? How much do you believe in them? So that's like 1A and 1B, okay? Try to gain ground when it pertains to enacting laws that protect life, and hold your representatives accountable to real pro-life situations. Secondly, what you need to do is you need to support local or national care centers through volunteering or financial giving. We have such a care center in Fremont called Heartbeat Hope Medical. These places care for women during a pregnancy and after a pregnancy. They are very concerned about helping young mothers who had babies that were perhaps unexpected. They are very concerned about helping those mothers thrive well in motherhood. Next, nationally, we need to think about, are there actually ministries that will help us win both on the data front and on the philosophical front? One such ministry you may have heard of is called Preborn. It's a ministry that seeks to show pregnant women an ultrasound of her child. And Preborn's own statistics show that 80% of moms who see their own baby on ultrasound will not go through with an abortion. You could seek to support that particular ministry. It's interesting that data matters to moms who are carrying. When they see that baby, now all of a sudden, that changes a philosophical perspective. Thirdly, finally, we need to recognize that we are fighting on a spiritual battlefield, and this is the moment in our culture right now that is the hottest point of the battlefield. I mean, if you're going to go and use a World War II analogy, this is like Normandy, D-Day. This is like the Battle of the Bulge. I mean, think of the major battles that changed the course of that particular war. This battle is no different, but on a spiritual perspective, and we often just think that it's horizontal or political. It's a spiritual battle, so we need to be fighting spiritually. I hope that you've been challenged to think through these matters, and I hope that you will really take these things to heart. And I'm sure that we could have a number of debates regarding some of the things that I said, and I'm open for that. I think we need to, as Christians, try to push for a higher standard of moral living through enacting laws, if that's what need be. We need to push for that and not just settle. And Christians at large should be doing this. Let's pray.